Hello, and welcome to Rappler Talk. And in this edition, it's a very special one because it happens to be the 10th anniversary of the founding of Rappler. And who better to speak with but with the person who had this kernel of an idea to make Rappler what it is today, Maria Reza. Hi, Maria. Nice to see you again. And
Hi, Cheche.
congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you. But you were also there at the founding of Rappler. You were
But
one of the
it
first people I went to.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like 10 years have passed, right? And when you look back at that year, 10 years ago, did you think you'd get this far?
I had faith that we would. What I didn't count on was exactly how hard, how difficult it would be. I didn't count on being arrested a few times. I didn't count on having to fight for the facts. That all of that stuff was new, but I had faith in the vision that we had, which was to take technology, to have journalists embrace that, and
Hmm.
work on an idea for what journalism was going to evolve into. We continue doing that today.
But in that media landscape 10 years ago, was it the right time to go and to make a radical switch from traditional media to the digital format?
Everyone warned me about the dangers of it, but it was the absolute right time. And I would even argue it was a little delayed because what I realized in ABS-CBN, so when I was heading ABS-CBN, I
Mhm.
realized that traditional news groups looked at the internet as an add-on. And yet, this is going to be the tail that wags the dog. So
Mhm.
the internet was where, it was, we put our youngest people there. We put, they wouldn't be like the top string, like your best people you put on your primetime newscast.
Yes.
But your internet are like your youngest or the people who aren't quite performing. I mean, it wasn't a place of experimentation. So I thought that what I learned in the 6 years I was with ABS-CBN is that
Mhm.
efficiency is what traditional media looks for, but
Yeah.
innovation is what the internet needed, and
Mhm.
that we traditional journalists didn't embrace the internet enough at that point. So really, Rappler was an experiment. I think I remember telling you this. I said, look, what are we going to lose? We do this for a year. If it doesn't work, we all move back or move on to whatever else we want to do. But
Mhm.
if it does work, it's a new world.
Yes, but you did say earlier that you had faith. And you rightly pointed out that the best people in the organization were put on traditional media, and we did not really embrace internet as a source of news. What did you have faith in?
The people we put together. We've known this since Probe. So, to those who don't know, Cheche is the reason I'm in the Philippines today.
Maria?
She started this little company called Probe in the 80s and roped me in. So when I started getting arrested, I sent her a text saying, Chet, this is all your fault.
No, you can't
But
be. This is of your own making, Maria. And the success belongs to you, rightfully, because did you think at that time, on year one, ground zero, that you would get to 10 years so fast and so furiously?
I'm going to say something you always used to say when we were working on Probe. It's not about you, it's about the team. And you know how amazing my co-founders are. I've always felt like uh, the vision of Rappler, people think it's me. I drive, like I know I'm a nerd. So I look at ideas of distribution, I look at ideas of
Mhm.
how the technology is changing. But the Manangs were are incredible. We couldn't have done it without each other. People
Yeah.
think I'm alone. I am not. And that's a huge thing when you're under attack. There are four of us, Glenda, Gloria, Beth Frondoso, Chai Hofilenya, and myself. And anytime something good or something bad happens, the four of us, now after this long, we had worked together in ABS for a little bit, but really it was forged in fire. Rappler forged you in fire. Every time something bad happens, we don't even have to communicate. We already know the where we're going to run, and we run in four different directions to
Mm-hmm.
get to the same point. And
Mm-hmm.
then, crisis management is far better with four people than it is with one. And we were in crisis for the last
All the
five
time.
years.
Yeah. But the
Yeah,
four of
you know this, diba?
yes, but the four of
But
you came from four different threads, correct? And you
yes,
merged
and
it. When did that? When did the four of you gel into one strong unit?
at the beginning, I mean, you were there in our first meetings, and the ambition was so huge, right? We were going to put a newscast in your pocket. That was how huge it was, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this was before Facebook Live. This was before any of the things that could put live video on your phone. And part of it was a combination of broadcast. That was I came from broadcast journalism. Beth Frondoso handled and created the most recent newscast for ABS-CBN. But we both came from broadcast journalism. You were part of the broadcast journalism loop, and then there was the investigative journalism, the newsbreak, the print loop that came in. But the transition really is Glenda, who was she was the managing editor of ANC when I was head of ABS-CBN News. And,
Mm-hmm.
during that time period, anytime we experimented with something, we would try it first in ANC. If it worked, then Beth would pick it up for TV Patrol and ABS-CBN. So we had kind of our own little factories, and we took that into Rappler. So at the very beginning, I think the biggest shock was from managing 1,000 journalists to 12 with you as one of the 12, right? I mean, in ABS, I had assistants. In Rappler, I transcribed everything. And again, I remember you, like you always said that you were the best PA, and you really were. I'm the best transcriber. I'm fast.
But did you count on being controversial?
Uh, even when I was heading ABS-CBN News, we
Mm-hmm.
took positions of values like the Peninsula Siege, right? We had 12 of our journalists who were, in quotes, arrested, and we filed a case at the Supreme Court then, because that's on principle. What happened at that Peninsula Siege was, that was the first time that covering an attempted coup, because that's what it was redefined as a criminal offense. So it moved from the defense, from the military to the police. And
Mm-hmm.
so that to me is the beginning of where we are today. And we actually saw that happen at the beginning with the Arroyo administration, the attacks against the media. And
Mm-hmm.
then, I guess I never expected what we have lived through in Rappler, because it's unimaginable in a country that has a constitution, a bill of rights the way we
Mm-hmm.
do. I think,
Mm-hmm.
the Filipinos who created the 1987 constitution, their heads must be reeling. Well, we know this from Christian Monsod.
Yeah, yeah. But having come from traditional broadcast media, you did not incur these kinds of problems that you now face, like cases being filed against you, you being arrested. You were dealing with problems of logistics, of protecting your crew from being kidnapped, stuff like that. What is the big difference between what you were doing before in ABS, in traditional media, and what you're doing now?
So I'll first correct. In a way, again, being head of ABS-CBN News was good training for what happened to us, because when I came into ABS-CBN, my first year, I
Mm-hmm.
had a case filed every month. So like the first year, there were 12 cases, and some of that was because we decided to do something differently. So we actually had something called a special separation program, and there were cases filed, including one. I don't know if you remember this, including a case that tried to get me deported, saying I wasn't a Filipino citizen. I laughed then.
Oh,
I was the head of
you're saying
ABS-CBN News
these are cases against you.
when I was with ABS. Yeah,
Uh,
and it was quickly dismissed when there was rule of law. right? And there wasn't the propaganda war that is happening now where facts become lies and lies
Mm-hmm.
become facts. That's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest difference today. So I would
Mm-hmm.
say that what I had lived through in ABS-CBN as the head of news, I realized that if you do something different, that you will have pushback. And the pushback can be threats, can be legal cases. I
Mm-hmm.
just didn't expect it to come from our government, because again, this shows you, I think, how petty politics has become and how mafia like, right? Because this idea of trying to bully you or harass you to silence, the
Mm-hmm.
idea that you could actually intimidate a news organization, you know, that that's a certain mentality. And the way news groups were attacked under the Duterte administration is primarily first through the business, right? Look at the attacks on the Inquirer, right? It was against the family. It was the Prietos were attacked. And then the attacks on ABS-CBN is the
Mm-hmm.
franchise, the
Mm-hmm.
amount of money it lost. And in Rappler, where did they come in? They came in at the business, right? So it was law and, I mean, frankly,
And economic. It was economic.
it's, and that's also why it's really important that independent media survive this time period. I think if we didn't evolve and innovate, even while we were attacked in 2018, after the government tried to shut us down,
Mm-hmm.
we would have gone bankrupt. But in many ways, I always say, the Nietzsche quote about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah,
We
that's what
should have gone, right? We should have gone bankrupt in 2018 because that's what the government had tried to do. They
happened.
had scared away our advertisers, they
Mm-hmm.
had scared away people. But we kept doing our jobs. And the better part is that we came together to come up with a new sustainable business model that, when the pandemic hit, put us in a great place to continue innovating. What
Okay,
doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's the Nietzsche quote.
and that's why you have survived. Is
I
that?
think
Mm. Go
I
ahead.
think it's what you said, like, and I'm going to quote. I think there are two things that I learned from you when you were my leader, when you were leading Probe. I think the first one was it's always about the team. It is always about the team. But I think more than any journalist or anyone who's led a company, you never took credit for what Probe did, right? You always said it's always about the team. And I think the second one is, I don't know if you remember the very first case that we had in 1988.
Mm.
It was the Tropical Fish Exporters Association of the Philippines. It was
Yeah,
a story I wrote and directed and
brought us
produced.
support.
You
Yeah.
were you were the reporter, and I got scared. I mean, I was scared when we got the legal case. They meant to scare us, and then in those days we could still film in court, we could tape in court, and we played this forever in Probe, where we took a video of you on the stand saying, direct quote,
Hey, Maria, you can
we
stop
will
that story
never,
there now.
wait, here's the quote. You got to get the quote. We will never, 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 never be intimidated. So, parang ganon.
Okay. All right. Have you ever been intimidated by all of these cases that have been filed against you?
I think the strength of the manangs is always a deep well. We
Mm.
never thought twice because we're not primarily business people. It was like they're trying to intimidate us, they're trying to prevent us from holding power to account. They're harassing us. And so at the beginning, when we were pushing back, we didn't even really have to talk about it. In fact, in January 2018, when the government tried to shut us down, uh, we came out with a statement within, probably the first hour or so, because it's very important to respond. We wrote the statement. We forgot to run it by our lawyers. So we wrote the statement, and then we also called a press conference because everybody was asking us for interviews, and we were like, we're not going to spend our time, because we had to tell our own people. And uh, um, in the press conference, before the press conference, our lawyers actually told us, stop, don't talk, let us study it. But I read it. All four of us read this decision. It was unbelievable. It was the first time in Philippine history it had ever happened. And we knew we were within our rights. I know the law well enough.
Mm.
All four of us had enough experience and we knew the boundaries of where you can go. So Chai and I did that press conference together, and we didn't really have anything prepared. And so, in between us on the table, we were just jotting our talking points. And you can see, I went back. I'm writing a book right now, and I went back to that video, and I was just flabbergasted at how calm we were and how it seemed like it was organized. We just did the right thing and stood up for the principles of journalism.
That's the bottom line there. The principles of journalism. I've always known you, Maria, as a very um, cheerful, optimistic person from the first time I ever met you. After all of these things that have happened to you, to Rapplers being 10 years old today, have you changed your attitude? Have you become less, more cynical?
I don't think cynical is the right. I've always known, we've known as journalists how bad people can get, right? But what keeps that in check is rule of law. That if you do something illegal, if you threaten someone, that the law will come and that there will be justice. Uh, I've spent my career really looking for justice for people who didn't have the ability to demand, and they went to the media, right? That's actually been the history of the Philippines, because our
Mm.
justice system moves so slowly.
Mm-hmm.
The media became kind of the takbuhan ng bayan. I remember
Yeah.
these
Mm-hmm.
these old studies that we had
Mm-hmm.
been around. You were there right
Mm-hmm.
at the transition in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I, I think that we just continued maintaining the ethics, the standards and ethics of journalism that I learned with you, that we created with Probe, and then I learned a lot more with CNN, and then I got to create something with ABS-CBN
Mm-hmm.
uh, to to turn it. But I think the biggest challenge for Rappler and for the world is when the journalists lost our gatekeeping powers and technology, which are the new gatekeepers, abdicated responsibility for the public sphere. Because inevitably, if you are a bad guy and you don't want to be held accountable, you use the technology to attack the journalists, to
Mm-hmm.
tear down their credibility. And that's what we've seen. I hope that now as we walk into our elections, more and more Filipinos are going to demand the facts. But it just shows you our old problems are still there,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but now compounded by the fact that you can't tell fact from fiction, because the platforms that deliver the news today, the tech platforms, actually prioritize the delivery of lies laced with anger and hate over facts. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why our world is so twisted. It's given rise to populist authoritarians like President Duterte.
Right. Okay. Given that situation, do you maintain? Um, are you? Do you still retain your faith in the justice system?
I think we always had faith that it would get better, right? Incrementally. And we've watched that in all the administrations post Marcos. I think, looking back in retrospect, the Ramos administration did a lot of good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we had all these stumbles. And now, technology has really helped crumble democracy. And this is why these elections are critically important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you asked me whether I have faith in the justice system. It's hard to answer that because technically these cases shouldn't have made it to court. The cases I face, right? I mean, imagine the cyber libel case that Ray Santos Jr. and I were convicted on this. Rappler was not. That's another interesting thing.
Mhm.
But the other part of that is that it was for a story that was done 8 years before the conviction, at a
Yeah,
time when the law we supposedly violated didn't even exist. I
yeah.
feel like it's Camus. It's like it's surreal. So, do I have faith? I have no choice but to have faith. But I understand the way pressure can be put on individuals in our system. I
Mhm.
understand how people can be silent because they're afraid they will be targeted. I
Mhm.
understand all of that. I now understand how Marcos stayed in power for almost 21 years. I didn't understand it until I lived through the time of
Through it.
Duterte.
Mhm.
But I still have faith that Filipinos, that our values haven't changed. And I hope that the justices, the judges in our judiciary realize that they are defining the line. They are defining the quality of our democracy. And I have to have faith that
Mhm.
they will be guided
Okay.
by their role in history. I think you can take a look at what Commissioner Guanzon just did.
Yeah.
I think you introduced me to Bing Guanzon when we were still in Probe, right?
Yes,
She
yes,
did something unprecedented by releasing her judgment
yes.
because it looked like there were forces that were mitigating the release of that until after her retirement.
Okay, having said that, we have no choice but to retain our faith in the judicial system. You also
In the
mentioned
people,
in the people, yes. And you're saying that the coming elections are very crucial. Do you retain faith that the Filipino will overcome?
I don't know. Yeah, let me put it this way. I've said this internally, and I've said it in our. We just formed a large coalition, the Facts First PH coalition, to fight for facts. Right.
Yeah.
Um, I think this is it. This is our epic battle for facts, and what's at stake: justice, truth, our democracy. If we lose this battle, and I can be unemotional enough to look, to pull back, because if you only rely on statistical surveys, the statistical surveys which put Pres- Bongbong Marcos, Ferdinand Marcos
And
Jr. as the front runner by a lot, also measures the impact of the disinformation campaigns that have hit Filipinos. Right? Will people vote that way? I think that's the question. Um, so when I pull back, let's
mhm,
say whoever wins, let's say Marcos wins. If he
mhm,
wins, then it opens another chapter in Philippine history. We are back to the
mhm.
future. Because if you think about it, we're back to 1986 when a Marcos is up against a widow, a woman,
Another one.
and here we
You're repeating it.
are again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. Having said that, you and Rappler marking its 10th year. What do you see for Rappler in the next 10 years? What are your hopes for Rappler?
I think depends on where our democracy goes. Will our democracy survive? Right?
Mm,
If this is an existential moment, this is the Avengers assemble moment. If you are in a battle for facts, get your superpower out and
mhm,
join that
mhm,
battle. If facts lose,
mhm.
then we're back to the future. We'll just repeat. It's so interesting. You have to really become older to see the cycles of history. If we lose that, then journalism will die. I mean, or evolve. I've worked in China under Deng Xiaoping, where I had a minder, and we could only live in expat housing that was given by the government. That was how controlled it
But
was. I was president of the Jakarta Foreign Correspondents Club in the last year of Suharto, so I know what it's like to work under authoritarian rule. It's not the same as working under a democracy, but in some ways, it's easier because you don't have to do what Rappler is doing right now, which is to hold the line, because this is what the Constitution says. This is what we're demanding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then that will determine where Rappler goes. I mean, this sounds really bad, but it is that moment, right? It is where our democracy goes will determine where journalism and where Rappler goes. But regardless of that, Rappler, I think, will depend on our next generation. You
Okay.
know, it's because we grew up at a certain time. I mean, when I talk to the young Rapplers today and I work with them, it's so different from when I used to work for you.
Yeah.
It's like the work standards, the way they do things in collaboration, like they actually sit. I don't know whether it's the pandemic, but they like working together. um, I like solitude when I'm writing. You know what I mean? So iba-iba talaga, depende
Yeah.
na to. So
Yeah.
Rapplers, it's up to you to take the values and the mission and bring it
Uh,
forward.
okay. So, would you say that Rappler is now at the crossroads?
I think our country is at a crossroads. Is Rappler at a crossroads? I think Rappler is in transition. The Manangs are all, I'm 58 years old. That's, you know, uh,
Did you
I'm
have
not,
you have to announce that so that I would have to give a relative answer? I will not.
I, um,
So it's not the country's in transition. Are you optimistic about the future?
I have to be optimistic, but I will say that, like in ABS-CBN, we've had succession planning in place in Rappler since, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, since a few years ago, because, and it's part of the reason, for example, our core management team has a lot more people. Like, I like keeping a core team to about 5 or 6 people
Small.
max, because then you can't be agile. But right now we're quite large, because we have young managers who are getting, this is our succession planning. So I have to be optimistic. We have weathered the bad times by, I guess this is what we've proven, that good values make good business, that the human, um, that our humanity, that it is okay that you can believe in the good, um, because that's the only way you can be the good. So we try to be the good, but again, something I learned from you, Checha. I think the last part is, you have to draw the lines. And
Yeah.
again, there's no black and white person more than Cheche Lazaro. You have to draw the lines
You're turning the
because,
tables, Maria. You're turning the tables. But when you speak of succession planning, it's indicative of the fact that you plan to have Rappler for beyond the 10 years and
of
more
course,
multiple tens in the future. So I think that that's a good sign, right? Your optimism about the country and your optimism about having successors, younger successors, is good news, right?
it's so funny. You're just making me realize that I'm actually not really as enthusiastic, right? Like you're saying, it's good news, it's good news. So much depends. The future depends on what we do now. But it's not we Rappler or we journalists. It's we the people of the Philippines. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's hard to plan beyond that. Will Filipinos care enough? What I think we've seen in the registration for the vote, that they care, but will they be able to get beyond the behavior modification system that makes lies facts? Can we have integrity of elections? I don't know. That's part of the reason I think I'm cautious, and Rappler is built into that. But yes, absolutely, we built Rappler for the long term. But I think the other part, as a manager, I also know what I don't know. I'm not young. But that's right. And I don't look at the world through those lenses. I came from old power, the very groups that are being, turned upside down. I came from traditional corporate big media, except when we started Probe. Probe
Yeah.
was a pushback against corporate media as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think
But
new leadership.
even if you came from that background, you transitioned from large to small. and built small to big, correct?
Yes, for this time period. I was just going to say that as we evolve, as our new leaders come up, you will see a different Rappler that will reflect the ideas, the generation of our new leaders. That's really important because you're talking to your audience. When I was leading Rappler, the median age in the Philippines is 23 years old. That's gotten a little bit older. And then there's a new younger generation that has grown up at a time of fake news, right? So there's it's a different way of thinking. And I really look forward to seeing our young leaders step up and create something new that will address their generation.
Well, as Rizal said, the hope of this fatherland is in the young people, and Rappler is contributing to that. So, on that note, thank you very much, Maria. That was a wonderful looking back into the past, assessing the present, and looking towards the future. Thank you for joining us, friends. And to Rappler, happy 10th birthday. And here's to the next 10. Thank you and goodbye.